Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. Now we come to episode 6 of the John Adams miniseries. To quote Doctor Strange, we're in the end game now. There's 2 more episodes. This is Unnecessary War, and it deals with Mr. Adams's presidency and all the major incidents that occurred during those 4 years, including the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts, the XYZ affair, and the Quasi War, which, funny enough, are not addressed by name at all, despite being important to the plot of the episode. But I think a lot of those names did not come about until later, but the Alien and Sedition Acts is named after the specific acts themselves. Now, the episode picks up a little bit after the ending scene of the previous episode. See Adams going into his presidency. He's talking with Thomas Jefferson about the whole issue with France, which, if the last episode is any indication, is about to pick up a bit more. Because that episode, we had Washington not wanting to get involved in the war with Britain that France is doing. The envoy, Ambassador Genet, getting a little triggered. And now here, it's going even worse. Tensions are high, things are starting to break down. By the end of the episode, things are resolved, partially due to the fact there's another change in government, and it's the Rise of Napoleon, which, of course, in American history would eventually lead to the Louisiana Purchase, but there's talks of annexation at points. Now, the major plot thing politically here is the Quasi War, which, for those of you who don't remember, was an undeclared war between the U.S. and France between 1798 and 1800, and it was over the application of the 1778 treaty, little disagreements, which they tried to solve with the XYZ affair, which was named for codes for the diplomats, but it didn't work, and then the war went. Since it was undeclared because, Congress didn't officially stamp anything, so it's a war, but not a war. But then again, it's that thing, if a war goes on in the forest and it's undeclared, did it really happen? But yeah, hence why Quasi War. And it was a mainly naval engagement in the Caribbean and the Atlantic. We don't really see a lot of the battles, but the more talk about it. And militarily, we see Hamilton and his buddies getting the army involved, and it eventually gets disbanded by Adams, because you see him going back and forth, because he's trying to figure out where in his presidency he wants to take things. And you see he is a man of multiple opinions, and we see a lot of that when he's talking with Jefferson. We see some of them, we see where they different in their opinion, mainly with how the government should go, like with the Alien and Sedition Acts. Obviously, Jefferson's going to be against those. If you're not familiar with the Alien and Sedition Acts, I got my notes right here to tell you what they were. There were 4 acts. The Naturalization Act made it hard for immigrants to become citizens. The Alien Friends Act made it so the president could imprison and deport non-citizens deemed dangerous, or they were from a hostile enemy nation. That was the Alien Enemy Act. And the Sedition Act criminalized making false statements critical of the government. The reason I put quotation marks there is that technically anything that you would say against the government, like you could say, Mr. Adams is a crap president. Technically that would be considered critical of the government, and you could be arrested. Now, before I even get into it, I think you could all see what a lot of the issues with these are. Like that last one, I believe that is a violation of the First Amendment, guys. I mean, there are limits on what the First Amendment protects, but that was more later as the government evolved and we figured out, there should be some instances where it would not apply, like with the First Amendment, for example. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater and get away with anything if people get trampled. If there is a fire, you can't be charged with anything because, hey, you're telling the truth. No fire, if someone gets trampled to death, technically you could be charged with manslaughter because you knowingly said it when you know there wasn't a fire. And then slander and libel also fall into that. It's not protected by the First Amendment. And then, of course, there's a whole thing that some people misconstrue what the First Amendment means. They think it means they could say anything and nobody could be critical of them. It's like, no. Read it. It says, technically, if you want to get specific about it, it would mean Congress, but we take it to mean the whole government. The little thing to throw in there. But it means that the government cannot retaliate against you for saying stuff like, the aforementioned Mr. Adams is a bad president. Or more recently, people saying stuff about the last couple presidents. Within reason. There are times where public we can yell it. Like those people that did the hanging their Obama signs, obviously referencing a lynching. It's like, that's a moment where, even though it goes into assault territory, if somebody walked up to the guy and hit him, you would not blame him. However, the government should not be allowed to arrest you for that, because you are exercising your First Amendment right. They may not like it, but it's your First Amendment right. So passing something like that could make it a criminal, that's a vastly First Amendment violation. And in one conversation with Jefferson even points that out. And of course the other ones, making it hard for immigrants to become citizens, that's a low move. I'd have to go through the Constitution just to see if there's anything that specifically violates. It's kind of bad to do, but during a time like that you would understand it to a point. President imprisoning and deporting non-citizens deemed dangerous. That's a little bit harder to justify than the naturalization one, because you could tie it in with the other one. They come in, technically, if they are under American jurisdiction, they are protected by the Constitution, which seems to be another thing people don't seem to understand in more recent times. You know, the whole thing with Guantanamo Bay and all that stuff, where they don't care about them. They're terrorists, they don't deserve it. It's like, are they under U.S. jurisdiction? Then they are protected by the Constitution. They have rights, regardless of what you feel about what they did or did not do outside of the confines of their whatever terrorist act they did. If they're in our custody, they are protected by the Constitution. And with that thing, it's like, even if they're non-citizens, if they're on American soil, under American jurisdiction, they are protected by the Constitution. So being able to imprison and deport them just for speaking their mind, regardless of what it is, that's something. And then, of course, deemed dangerous, that's a slippery slope, because then it's like, what is deemed dangerous mean? Just because they're talking about stuff? I mean, if they have actually done something and you deport them, that's fine. I mean, we still do that nowadays. I mean, I know there's somebody who's a friend of the family who did something, and since they were born in Mexico, they were deported back to Mexico after they served their sentence. And then in other cases, they'll usually deport aliens deemed undesirable because of similar things. So it's like that one you get. But not doing anything, that's going into 1984 thought crime territory. And it's like, no. Hostile alien nation, that one goes into the same thing, because it's like, really? You're going to judge them for the fact that we are at war or having a disagreement with the nation they just happen to be from originally, or their ancestor came from. That's more a modern one, probably. But you're going to get that other one in there too. So it's like sins of the father much, to use the old cliche. And to go with this, the naturalization in the Alien Enemies Acts had no expiration in their clauses. The other two did, and they expired within a couple of years. Those two don't. And technically, the Alien Enemies is still used occasionally. For those of you who know your World War II history, and I only found out this specifically when I was doing the research for this part, because I heard in my political science class that part of it was still in the book, so I wanted to see what it was. This is it. The Alien Enemies Act, which was cited during World War II for the internment of the Japanese. You know, the thing that put George Takei and his family in the camps? It was that thing. The Alien Enemies Act. Just because they are descended from a nation that we were enemies with at the time and were going to war with. And apparently it also was something they used for the imprisonment of other non-citizens who were descended from Axis nations, Italians and Germans, which they weren't, rounded up as prevalently as the Japanese were, for obvious reasons. And of course it was cited more recently by former President Trump when he did his Muslim bans. That's probably the more recent one. Other than that, it's been like very, very minor. But think about that. Just because you're descended from someone we're at war with, really? Now I know somebody's going to bring in the whole Muslim thing, but it's like, not all Muslims are like that. I could get wanting to look into their background, but just going a wholesale, that is not something that we should be proud of as Americans. And I really think that Alien Enemies Act should actually be taken off the books, because it's one of those things like, yeah, no. But we all know why it's not going to, because in modern days it goes hand in hand with using the Patriot Act to do stuff. Which the Patriot Act I'm not going to get into in this video, just other than saying I am vehemently against it. But getting back on track with the episode and the whole thing, because I had to talk about those things to talk about this episode. Jefferson obviously is against it. Adams decides he's for it. And this is one line he says that really sums up why he thinks passing those would be a good one, even though a couple parts of the acts are tugging at him. And he has talks with Abigail, and then eventually he signs his name to him, and that is, "I've been trusted with the nation's safety." You can see that shows what his mindset is, but it also shows why he has to really think hard about it. Because at that point, it's like, when does caring about the safety of the nation go from being a responsible president to a tyrant in potentia? And it also brings up a line from Benjamin Franklin. I'm going to try not to butcher the line. "Those who give up liberty in order to gain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety." I've also heard it in another way, and it ends with "deserve neither and lose both." I think that gets it a little bit better. But you see where I'm going with that. Is that him enacting this? It's trying to do one thing, but in essence, he's just turning and spinning on the very freedom that they fought for during the whole revolution, and then with the Declaration, and then the Constitution. And they do show him wrestling with it, and Paul Giamatti does a good job doing this. I mean, he doesn't come out with a grand speech. It's just the subtleties of his performance and some of the scenes where he's actually talking. And then, of course, the scenes where he starts going against Hamilton shows really that he is a flesh and blood human in the gray area, not black or white. Because his whole thing with Hamilton is him going against some aspects of the Alien and Sedition Acts and what the people who want those ones really do want. And that, of course, him getting rid of the army and all that and trying to go for peace without going into full-blown war. That's, of course, a little bit later in the timeline that he really is going with it. But even early on, he wants to stay out of a war. And nice little bit of writing and all that. It's one thing that you really got to follow it pretty quickly and try to think, okay, how much time period is passing? Because I know this episode takes place within a 4-year time period, but it's like, where within that 4 years is each individual part of the episode? That's where you really got to be like, okay, it's there, it's there, it's there. I mean, if you really know your history, you're probably going to be able to go January, February, June. And before I move on to the non-political topics, there's also a moment and a line that Adams says when he's talking with Jefferson that also ties back in with the nation's safety, where he mentions, like, the representatives ask for this, who am I to go against it? Ties into that thing I mentioned in the previous episode about the 3 theories of how you operate in the political field in a republic. And it's one of those things that, like, yeah, you could tell he's wrestling with which direction to go with. Should he be Politico and try to stride both depending on the situation? Should he mainly go with the will of the people, or should he use his own judgment? This early on, especially with a man like Adams, you can see why he'd be wrestling with that. And by the end, it looks like he is following Washington's lead and going a little bit Politico, following the representations at times, but also going with his own judgment in other times. And of course, by the end, when the people want war and he doesn't get it to them, even though he gets peace, you can see why it costs him the election and why it goes to Jefferson, because Jefferson is going to go in a totally different direction, which, of course, that seems to be something that has not changed when you look at American politics in snippets and then as a grand scheme when it comes to the presidency, is that after a while the people tire of one direction and then switch the other, which sadly is why the Democrats and the Republicans in the modern era seem to have that stranglehold on the presidency. I mean, sometimes you'll get changes that go quickly. I mean, look at the last one. I mean, 4 years of the red, and then we went back to blue, and then in the early 90s you had that too. You mean you had a Republican president that was succeeded by a Republican, and then he only lasted 1 term. Sometimes you'll get stuff like that, but it still is in that stranglehold. But here you get to see a little bit of that early on, which is why I find American history so fascinating early on in the time period of the Republic, because you get to see where a lot of the crap we're dealing with now began to originate. Even though they didn't really have official parties yet, here you could see the beginnings of them. The whole party system. It's like, Now, on a personal standpoint, Adams is dealing with a lot. I mean, his friendship with Thomas Jefferson is deteriorating, and by the end of the episode, it is non-existent, with them disagreeing on politics and other stuff. Then you can see they're being cordial and respectful of one another for what they've done, but to steal a line from Christian Bale, "You and me are done professionally." They're done professionally, and they're also going to be done personally for a bit, at least until the end of the episode that we're going to see next time. And other stuff. His son-in-law has seemingly abandoned his daughter Nabby, which did not really happen in real life the way that it's shown there. Apparently Nabby only returned to her parents when she had to undergo the mastectomy instead of going with potions and poultices as it was listed. And he didn't leave her and their children, and he was actually by her side during it. They threw that in there for dramatic effect, it looks like. Which, of course, really going to come in the next episode due to a line that they have Adams say, which I'll get to that then. Then there's the whole thing of Charles Adams being a drunkard, his marriage deteriorating and him dying, and then Adams being stone-faced like he brought it upon himself. Which, due to my whole situation involving some aspects of my family, I get why he's like that. Because that's how I view the whole thing with my mother right now. Is like if we heard news that she died, I'd be like that. Like, alright, she's gone, don't have to worry about her anymore, but it's like she brought it on herself. And of course, unlike Charles here, where he seems to have done it within a shorter period of time, my mother, it's decades, so it's like, yeah, it's cruel. But it's one of those things where it's cruel, but in a situation like this, cruelty is justified and warranted. You see in the beginning of the White House, and she doesn't really say much, but Abigail looking around and seeing that it's being built on slave labor, even from the North. You can see it's eating on her, especially since they did try to get slavery out with the Constitution and the Declaration, but it didn't work. You know, the whole thing it said, 100 years hence in a previous one. But anyway, that is Unnecessary War in a nutshell, dealing with all the political fallout from Adams' presidency and seeing his personal life deteriorate. And then in the end, he's just simply Farmer John Adams from Massachusetts. Just a normal citizen like everyone else. Served his country, and it seems to have made him unpopular in certain circles. While other people probably do respect him for what he did, other people don't like him. And it leads to a line from 1776, obnoxious and disliked. Some people probably view him with that, even if they will respect him for what he has done. It's a rise in the first few episodes, and now we see his fall in this episode. And the last episode that we'll get to next week is really the denouement of the whole thing. It's the ending of Adams' life, see the deterioration of his family, some joy like with his son becoming president, and of course the thing with him and Jefferson reconnecting that we'll see. But, the fall. But it does have some good moments in there too. Now this episode was also nominated for sound mixing, but obviously didn't win. And with how everything goes, you can see. Only other major thing I haven't mentioned is that in one scene, Abigail is kind of nudging John towards the Alien and Sedition Acts, which I don't know if that actually happened. I have to research more into it, but based on how they present their relationship in the show and what I know about their correspondence from outside research, just a little bit I know of it, I could kind of see it happening, but if it didn't, I can see why they threw it in for dramatic effect, especially when she's reading some of the stuff the press is saying about her husband, which would be protected by it. I mean, if they're trying to say it as a hard and light fact, not an opinion based on what they see the person doing, and there's that whole thing, would this be considered libel, or is this them giving their opinion based on his behavior? Anyway, folks, that is my review and my thoughts on Episode 6. Next week, we're going to get to Episode 7, and as I just said, the denouement of everything. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, share it. If you want to support the channel, click down on the Patreon link, and if you want to request anything just as a one-off, the PayPal link is also there. With what YouTube has been doing to me recently, I really do need the support if you do want to help the channel grow. And until next time, guys, thank you for watching.